What if I told you that a family was torn apart not by tragedy alone, but by the very people who claimed to grieve the most? What if a memorial meant to honor a fallen service member turned into a battle over cameras, control, and public perception? Tonight, you're going to hear the shocking story of Garrison Brown's memorial and why his own family may never trust Cody and Robin again. Stay with me, because the truth behind the headlines is far more intense than anything you've seen on TV. Welcome back, everyone. Today is Thursday, May 8th, 2025, and what I am about to share comes from a source connected directly to a military memorial tied to the Nevada National Guard. And this information may finally explain why an entire family has drawn a hard line and stepped away from two people once at the center of their lives. This story does not begin on television, and it does not begin with drama. It begins with a service member, a young man named Garrison Brown, who served his country and who, according to those closest to him, made very clear wishes about how he wanted his life and his passing to be handled. Those wishes were not vague. They were documented through military channels, through the standard process every service member goes through: wills, directives, power of attorney, and end-of-life planning. And this is where the tension begins, because when tragedy struck, those wishes became the foundation for everything that followed, or at least they were supposed to be. According to a source who helped coordinate the Nevada National Guard Service Memorial in March of 2024, the family was already navigating grief, quietly, privately, carefully, trying to honor Garrison as a person, not as a public figure, not as a storyline, and not as a moment for attention. And the memorial itself was not meant to be a spectacle. It was meant to be a respectful, controlled environment, coordinated through military mortuary services out of Virginia, following established protocols and honoring the fact that Garrison chose cremation and did not request a traditional military burial. The urn remained with Janelle and her sons throughout the ceremony, and everything until that point followed exactly what had been agreed upon. But behind the scenes, something else was unfolding, something that, according to the source, immediately changed the emotional temperature of the room before the service even began. The family reportedly became aware that Cody intended to attend with a production crew, and not just attend, but film, and not just film, but position himself at the center of the narrative. And this is where the alarm bells went off, because Garrison had been clear he did not enjoy being on the show. He did not want his life or his struggles used as content, and those closest to him felt a responsibility to protect that boundary, even after his passing. The source claims a family member reached out directly to Cody, expressing that his presence with cameras was not wanted, and that Robin should not attend either, not out of cruelty, but out of respect for Garrison and the emotional state of the family. This request was reportedly ignored, and when Cody and Robin arrived, already wired for filming with cameras in tow, the atmosphere shifted immediately. According to multiple people present, the room fell silent, the energy drained, and what was meant to be a moment of remembrance became a moment of tension and disbelief. The source described the arrival as performative, not quiet, not reflective, but marked by an air of importance that felt deeply out of place given the circumstances. And what made it worse was the belief among family members that this moment was being captured not to honor Garrison, but to shape a future narrative, one that centered someone else entirely. And this belief did not come from nowhere, because the source claims Cody holds significant influence over how the show is edited and what stories are told. And from their perspective, this memorial was being positioned as a chapter in a redemption arc rather than a farewell. And this is where the hurt deepened, because the family had already been through enough, and now they felt as though even this moment was being taken from them and repurposed. And yet, despite the tension, despite the requests, despite the emotional weight, the cameras continued to roll, and those who did not wish to be filmed had little control in that moment. And the source recalls that no one engaged with Cody or Robin during the service, that the urn never left the custody of Janelle and her sons, and that the family made a conscious effort to keep focus where it belonged. But the presence itself was enough to fracture something that may never fully heal. And as the service continued, another issue arose: seating. Cody reportedly attempted to place himself in the front row beside Janelle, positioning himself as the grieving father alongside the grieving mother, but the family intervened, and instead, Hunter, an Air Force officer, was seated beside Janelle, while Cody and Robin were placed further back, a decision that spoke volumes without a single word being said. And while the service followed protocol, with honors given respectfully, and the urn returns to Janelle afterward, questions lingered, questions that would later become public statements that contradicted what those present say actually happened, including claims about burial locations and decisions that, according to the source, Cody had no legal authority to make, because his name did not appear on Garrison birth certificate, and he was not listed in the will or insurance documents, which had been carefully prepared, naming Janelle as power of attorney and ensuring that control remained with those Garrison trusted. And this planning spared the family additional legal stress, but did nothing to ease the emotional damage caused by what they perceived as a violation of trust and intent. And as the memorial continued, another layer of betrayal fastened. Concluded, and Cody and Robin departed. The source says there was a collective sense of disbelief, not just at their presence, but at the stories that would later emerge. Stories that did not align with what the family had agreed to, or what the military had coordinated. And this disconnect is where many believe the real divide was cemented, because once trust is broken at a moment like this, it is not easily repaired. And the family believes that what followed on screen was not an authentic reflection of grief, but a constructed narrative, one that placed cameras before compassion and control before consent. And that belief is what has led to the silence, the distance, and the refusal by many to continue participating in something that now feels exploitative rather than familial. And this is only the first half of the story, because what happened after the cameras left may be even more telling. Because according to the same source, the aftermath of the memorial is where intentions became clearer and where the emotional divide turned permanent. Because while the family returned to private mourning, there were already conversations happening about how the footage would be used and how the story would be framed. And this is where the source expressed deep concern, stating that from their perspective, the focus was never meant to remain on Garrison as an individual, but instead to pivot toward a narrative of isolation, misunderstanding, and victimhood centered around Cody and Robin. And this perception was reinforced by later public comments that contradicted the agreed-upon arrangements, particularly statements suggesting control over the remains and burial decisions that legally and logistically did not belong to them. And the source emphasized that military mortuary services are meticulous about documentation, authority, and consent, and nothing moves forward without clear approval, which is why they were stunned to hear claims that did not match the records or the process. And this disconnect raised questions, not just about accuracy, but about motive. Because when stories shift after the fact, it suggests that the original event is being reshaped to serve a purpose. And that purpose, according to the source, was to generate emotional engagement for viewers rather than to honor the wishes of the deceased. And the family felt this deeply because Garrison had expressed discomfort with being portrayed publicly and had struggled with how aspects of his life were discussed on the show. And the idea that his passing could now become another chapter in that same story was devastating to those who loved him. And this is why many family members have chosen silence rather than confrontation, because engaging would only feed a machine they no longer trust. And the source also noted that other family members who were present conducted themselves with grace, kindness, and support, offering quiet comfort to one another without drawing attention or seeking the spotlight. And this contrast only heightened the discomfort surrounding Cody and Robin's presence, because it felt out of sync with the tone of the service and the expectations set beforehand. And while Robin is described as appearing conflicted and not entirely comfortable, the source maintains that the decision to film and to attend against the family's wishes ultimately overshadowed any personal feelings she may have had and reinforced the belief that the show now dictates behavior rather than relationships. And this belief is at the core of why the family has pulled away, because when grief becomes content and boundaries are ignored, the damage extends far beyond a single event. It reshapes trust, memory, and connection. And the source was particularly troubled by how easily the narrative could be altered once it reached television, because viewers only see what is presented, not the conversations, the requests, the refusals, or the emotional labor happening off camera. And this imbalance leaves the family feeling unheard and misrepresented and unwilling to continue participating in a process that no longer reflects their reality. And the source stressed that none of this diminishes the value of Garrison's service or life, but rather underscores the importance of remembering him as a person first, not a plot device. And that is why they felt compelled to speak out, because silence would allow a version of events to stand unchallenged. And while they acknowledge that every story has multiple perspectives, they stand firmly by what they witnessed and coordinated, and they believe the truth matters, especially when it involves a service member who deserved dignity and respect. And as time passes, the distance between Cody and much of the family continues to grow, not because of a single moment, but because of what that moment represented: a choice between empathy and exposure, between honoring wishes and creating content. And once that choice was made, it could not be undone. And this is why the family no longer engages, why phone calls go unanswered, and why the show itself has become a symbol of loss rather than connection. And this is the reality behind the scenes. Not loud, not dramatic, but quietly heartbreaking. And it leaves viewers with a question that lingers long after the episode ends. What happens when reality television collides with real grief? And who pays the price when the cameras keep rolling? And as the source concludes, all we can do is reflect and respect the humanity that exists beyond the screen, and remember that behind every scene, there are real lives, real emotions, and real consequences that cannot be captured or edited out. As the story continues after the memorial, according to the same source, the events that unfolded left a lasting impact on family dynamics and created a divide that appears unlikely to heal anytime soon. Because while the family returned to private mourning, Cody and Robin were reportedly already thinking about the narrative that could be built from what had just occurred. And the source explained that this mindset created tension and distrust because the focus was no longer on Garrison or his wishes or the quiet grief of those who loved him, but instead on a storyline designed for viewers, with the cameras capturing every moment and every expression. And this was exactly what the family had tried to avoid. The source went on to explain that the presence of cameras and the intention to film turned what should have been a private act of remembrance into a performative event. And while Cody reportedly positioned himself as the grieving father, the source maintains that this was less about genuine grief and more about controlling the narrative and claiming a spotlight that the family had never agreed to grant him. And as the days passed after the service, the family became increasingly aware that claims were being made publicly that did not match the reality of what had occurred during the memorial, including statements about custody of the remains, the burial, and even the will, which legally listed Janelle as power of attorney and gave her full authority to manage Garrison estate. And this legal documentation ensured that Cody and Robin could not override the wishes of the deceased. But according to the source, Cody and Robin's behavior suggested that they believed public perception could influence or even override legal reality. And this belief was alarming to those who had helped coordinate the service, because the mortuary services and military protocols are precise and every detail is carefully documented. And the idea that someone would attempt to create a personal story from a process that is meant to honor a fallen service member was troubling, and it compounded the emotional stress for the family, who had already been navigating immense grief. And as the situation developed, the source reported that Cody was allegedly attempting to frame himself as the victim, estranged from the family who had rejected him and Robin. In this portrayal, the memorial was no longer about Garrison. It had become a tool for a narrative designed to elicit sympathy from viewers and to create drama for television. And this reportedly caused a great deal of frustration and hurt, because the family wanted to honor Garrison on his own terms, not to be used as props for someone else's redemption arc. And according to the source, the contrast between the behavior of Cody and Robin and the rest of the family was stark, with the other relatives described as quiet, respectful, and cooperative, focused entirely on supporting one another and maintaining the dignity of the memorial and the memory of Garrison. And this difference in behavior only highlighted what the family perceived as a disruption and an exploitation of a deeply personal moment that should never have been turned into content. And as the source explained, the emotional impact of these actions has contributed to a long-term estrangement, with multiple family members now refusing to speak to Cody and Robin because trust was broken in one of the most vulnerable circumstances imaginable. And the source emphasized that this is not about hatred or ill intent. And the source believes that by sharing this account, they can offer insight into why families sometimes distance themselves and make choices that may seem puzzling from the outside, but are rooted in a desire to preserve dignity, respect, and emotional safety. And they urge viewers to remember that behind every televised story, there are real emotions, real grief, and real human consequences that cannot be captured on camera or altered by editing. And that is why, according to the source, the focus must remain on understanding the human element, the private choices, and the profound responsibility we all have to honor those who can no longer speak for themselves. And that concludes the account of the memorial events and the ongoing family impact. According to this source, providing context for the estrangement and illustrating how sensitive events can be complicated by public attention, media involvement, and conflicting intentions.